Hello, everybody. It's Tuesday, September the 16th, 2025. This show may go out today or maybe tomorrow. Once again, Elon Musk, the world's richest man, or certainly one of the world's two richest men, depending when you look at it, is in the news again. He's been offered a pay plan, a pay deal by Tesla to run the company, which could make him a trillionaire. Hasn't made everybody happy. Pope Leo suggests that the world is in what he calls big trouble. Some people might suggest the world's already in big trouble, with or without Musk as a trillionaire. Lots of other comments on this. Frank Fukuyama, an old friend of the show, warns about our coming plutocracy, and he boils the numbers down, suggests that if indeed Musk becomes a trillionaire, he can contribute to paying off or partly paying off the whole US national debt, which of course he won't do. My guest today has some thoughts on this, to put it mildly. Ingrid Robeyns came out with a book last year. It's called Libertarianism, The Case Against Extreme Wealth. The book is out this week in paperback all over the world, including in Japan. And Ingrid is joining us from Utrecht in the Netherlands, where she teaches. Ingrid, what do you make of this news about Musk being offered a contract by Tesla, that if he delivers on building the company more, he can become a trillionaire? Is this the perfect argument for the case against extreme wealth, which you make in libertarianism?
Yeah, so I wish I could say it doesn't matter or but I think it is just showing us that we are on this path of extreme wealth concentration, on which we've actually been for quite a while. And when I started to give talks on when my book came out a year ago, then Musk had somewhere around 300, just under 300 billion. And now it's like increasing rapidly. And indeed, the projection is already already on the kind of increase that he will see from his stocks and ownership, that it will go to a trillion, even without this pretty remarkable proposal that the board has put to him. But there is one kind of bright spot in this proposal, which is that it may incentivize him to stay out of politics. Andrew, I am no longer hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, let me repeat the question.
Okay.
Ingrid, that may be true in terms of keeping him out of politics, although it doesn't seem to be the case. He made a speech at the weekend about the United Kingdom needing revolutionary change of government. He spoke to a large anti-migrant rally, over 150,000 people in London. I wonder in your book whether you talk about this connection between populist politics and the populism of Musk and the rise of increasingly unequal extreme wealth in the world.
Yeah, so I actually should have written more about it, because I think when I wrote the book, because, you know, writing a book always takes a while before when you finish the last sentence and when it gets to the bookshops, I made some suggestions based on the research that I found between extreme wealth concentration and illiberal democracies, autocracies, kleptocracies, and so forth. But in between finishing the book and now, the situation in the world has, I would say, dramatically become worse. And there is a sort of a coalition, you would almost say, between at least part of the extreme wealth holders and those that are trying to, well, I think the right verb is really to end our democracies. So, and that, I think I'm sad, but I think the US really is the place where we see this happening right now, at least based on the information that I get, because this is, of course, also a question: what is the information that each of us gets in order to make our judgments? But previously, we would look at, say, the Russia, where we have de facto dictatorship, where there is also a coalition with the financial elite. And right now we see similar, very worrying developments in the US.
I wonder whether there's a cult of wealth, a cultural cult. Since you wrote the book, Jeff Bezos got remarried in Venice. There was a lot of demonstrations against it, but the world's press was there. Millions, tens of millions of dollars were spent on the wedding itself. Bezos is another pin-up, if that's the right word, for this new plutocratic age. What's the attraction of extreme wealth, particularly for people who are poor?
Yeah, so I think the let's just say the ordinary people are kind of divided. Some of them, especially when they've grown up in neoliberal in a society where neoliberal thought is dominant, they see this idea of the sky is the limit as an ideal, and they consider people who have become extremely wealthy as either geniuses or heroes or somehow of a very special nature, and they think they deserve their wealth. And that's one of the arguments I have in my book. So in my book, I argue that nobody deserves so much wealth. You can deserve somewhat more than an average person, but nobody can say they deserve to be super rich. And then I have a range of arguments which shows the bad effects of wealth independent of how it was created. But the thing with I really think we have myths around super wealthy people. And I think the very first statistics that is very relevant is that we consider them people who created their own wealth, but actually half of the big fortunes is either traceable or is based on inheritance. And inheritance basically just means you were lucky with the people with whom you were born, and they left you all those millions or billions. So I think we really need to revise our cultural mythology almost regarding the super wealthy, and we need to have a global conversation, but also within each society, of whether we think it is actually a good thing, all things considered, to have people that become so rich and hence also so powerful as we see now in politics.
Yeah, your book comes with a nice blurb from Thomas Piketty. He describes it as a must read. You're very much on the same page as Piketty in terms of his analysis of wealth inequality and taxation. Let's get to the book, Ingrid. The case against extreme wealth. You studied with Amartya Sen at Cambridge University. I don't know how I would describe him. I'd be curious as how you would describe him. Is he a moral economist, a moral philosopher? What's the best case? Is it an economic case? Is it a moral one? Is it a philosophical one? Is it a political one? What exactly is the case against extreme wealth?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I actually think the case against extreme wealth is what scholars and scientists would call overdetermined. That means we have all these separate reasons against extreme wealth accumulation, and there are so many of them that it's hard to see how one could still deny the overall case against extreme wealth concentration, except if one is in favor of either complete anarchy or what Hobbes would have said, like the fight of each against all and all against each. Because I think if we want peaceful societies which are where everybody has an opportunity to lead good lives, we do need, it's a kind of unavoidable that we have a government that arranges some stuff for us, like public goods and infrastructures, but also making sure there is equality of opportunity. And that means we also need democracy, because we need, I would hope we actually don't have to make the case for democracy, but we need to decide collectively how we're going to live together. And the problem with extreme wealth concentration is that many of these fortunes are historically tainted. They were based on slavery, of extractivism, or other processes that were never properly compensated. there's a fundamental philosophical argument that I made that I mentioned earlier, that based on moral desert, nobody can say they really deserve these arguments. And then there's a problem that it undermines democratic values, in particular political equality, and hence also possibly the stability of societies, and that it's incompatible with living on a stable planet, because the consumption patterns of the super rich are so out of balance. And then there's a final argument, or actually two. One is that extremely wasteful, because at some point having more money, you can't really use it for your own quality of life. So a less inegalitarian distribution overall leads to more people being healthy and happy and so forth. But finally, there's the argument that actually it might not be good for the super rich themselves, which is a bit of a having your cake and eat it arguments. But what I found in terms of the research on this is also that one could really question to what extent it actually makes the very wealthy, and especially their children, well off. These are the arguments I discuss in my book. Each argument, one chapter. There are other scholars who are working on or have published other arguments. So I'm like, whichever value you think is most important, whether you are a Democrat or whether you're an ecologist or you're more a philosopher, I think we should all agree that there are very strong arguments against extreme wealth concentration.
So is the core argument then a Hobbesian one? You mentioned Hobbes, that in a way, what you call neoliberalism, what some people might simply call the free market system, is a reversal to Hobbes's war of all against all, his natural state before the existence of a social contract. Is that the core argument? If there is one, I mean, I know I asked you, what is the case, not what the cases are. What is the single case? If you had one argument to make in terms of this case against extreme wealth, what is it?
I think it would be that we would all together live better together if we were to have less extreme inequality. And you could say, yes, that's a kind of anti-Hobbesian case, because Hobbes, of course, argued that if you don't have a government and some sort of social contract, that we will all fight to protect ourselves, our bodies, but also we are under constant dangers of others. And so that's basically an immoral world. And I think if we want to, so if you don't want to live in that world, and I'm actually wondering whether some of the super rich actually don't mind that all of us live in that world, but they're on top in their bunkers or in their sheltered places, safe. I think if you want to live in good societies, it's unavoidable that we have some sort of a social contract. And a social contract is a metaphor, a concept from political science, but also from other sciences, that just basically says, what are the rules of how we're going to live together? And I think whatever we decide, we should try to live in a world where inequality is not is within bounds. So I'm not a kind of a diehard egalitarian in the sense that I think there are no inequalities that can be justified. I do think some inequalities can be justified, and some people just work harder or take more risks. So some inequalities can be justified. Some work is just also more dangerous. But there are limits. And what we see right now, because we're really talking about people who have billions, and a billion is 1,000 million, so that's a huge amount of money. These inequalities cannot be justified, and they're also harmful for the social contract. So if you were to press me and say one reason, then I would say, yes, we need a social contract in order for us to live peacefully and to live happily where inequality is limited.
Does that ultimately, Ingrid, make your argument a utilitarian one? You're making the argument that actually extreme wealth and the divisions between the extremely wealthy and everyone else is creating unhappiness, so that we can actually create metrics for recalibrating that so that people will be happier. So is your argument ultimately a Benthamite one rather than Kantian or some other philosophical system?
So I am. I think my leanings are towards what philosophers would call consequentialist. So really looking at the consequences of certain institutions or laws or policies. But I do in the book also have the historical argument, um, which in which I trace down how some of these fortunes that we now see how they are historically unjustified. But the argument for moral desert is not a consequentialist argument. Actually, it is well what desert theories would call a desert-based argument, which means independent of the consequences. I think we can say that extremely large fortunes cannot be justified, because if you want to say that something is that you morally deserve it, you must be able to trace back the ultimate cause of your fortune to something in yourself. But the problem is that our success is so much dependent on all forms of luck. There is the natural lottery that John Rawls talked about. So basically, your inborn talents, you didn't create yourself. So that's luck. There is the great influence of social class and the parents that raised you. We don't pick our parents, so that's social luck. And then there is also what economists such as Robert Frank have called market luck. You can actually put in exactly the same amount of effort and the same dedication as an entrepreneur, and then by just mere luck in the market, one person becomes a billionaire and the other doesn't. So I think if you were to basically revisit how we see ourselves and just accept and acknowledge that luck plays such a big role in our lives, then we would also, I guess, become more humble and also accept that we may deserve some of what we get on our bank account and our investment accounts, but actually there are limits to how much we can say that is truly that we can really say is ours in the sense of that we deserve. So, I think that desert argument is pretty strong, but it depends on a certain view of human nature that is really at odds with the view of human nature in neoliberal culture, because the view of human nature in neoliberal culture says that ultimately everything is the responsibility, but also to the credit of the individual person. So if you end up being poor, you made the wrong choices. If you end up being rich, well, good for you, you made the right choices. And I just think this is an account of human nature that is really not correct. And also we have lots of evidence from the social sciences, from psychology, from child development, that luck plays such a big role. So one of the things I try to do in this book, although I am a philosopher, I'm actually also an economist, but I try to really bring together these insights from all these different fields and just see if you bring together all these insights and you connect the dots, what is the picture that emerges?
You talk about neoliberalism, Ingrid, but does anyone really make that argument that everyone who becomes extremely wealthy deserves it and everyone who's poor doesn't? I mean, we're not back in the 19th century in the world of Charles Dickens, are we? Who makes this argument?
Well, I mean, you see, in any case, you see if you look at the social policies and uh, the societal debates we had in the 70s and the 80s, and you look at how it is now, the world has become harsher, also in terms of how we treat those that are badly off. I can give you examples of my own country, where I mean this is really how especially parties that I think political scientists would classify as neoliberal, they would say, oh, well, people on benefits, we just have to lower the benefits so that the gap between what they have when they're on benefits and what they could earn on the market becomes bigger, so we incentivize them. So that's purely assuming that everybody who is on benefits actually is on benefits because they're too lazy or unwilling to work. But what they do not realize is that many people on benefits are actually disabled. They may not be able to hold a job in the regular labor market. So there's lots of assumptions about human nature in those policies and in those political proposals. But the same a bit so the same at the other side of the wealth distribution. And that was actually what you also said. Like, do we have this glorification of the super rich? Why do we consider them kind of, or I should say, part of the population considers them heroes? And that is really because we admire what they did, because we believe that what they did was of their own creation. But there was a
But
there was
yeah,
an
I take your point on that. But I'm more in your camp than out of it. But I mean, there are people like Bezos or Musk. I mean, okay, they had some advantages, a degree of luck and fortune and all the rest of it. But there's still, their accomplishments, for better or worse, are remarkable. I mean, Bezos has made billions of dollars as a startup entrepreneur. Musk came to the United States and has made a ridiculous fortune. Don't we need to acknowledge that talent? I mean, how else do you reward talent? I mean, clearly Bezos and Musk, we may not like them morally, but they're remarkably talented individuals.
Yes, so we should reward talent, but I think we should reward talent up to a certain level, because and then that's when the consequentialist arguments kick in. But also, we should really, I think, see these individuals as not operating in a vacuum. There was an article, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the Washington Post last week, that the companies of Elon Musk had received, I have this now out of my head, but from my memory, 38 billion in government subsidies over over all those years. So there's, first of all, that argument that actually they start with, we portray them as if they're completely self-made, but they're not. And also, they are, of course, operating against a background where society has created the conditions for entrepreneurs to succeed. So the internet was also partly created and funded by scholars, based on government subsidies. And in the case of Jeff Bezos, I think it's very interesting to read the statement that his ex-wife, Mackenzie Scott, made when they divorced, and she received also, I can't remember how many, but I think 200 billions out of the settlement. And she wrote this really interesting piece, which is available online, in which she said, she used the words, "I'm going to return this money to where it comes from, to society." So she has this view that if you are a very successful person, it's the collaboration. It's between society, the workers, everybody, and then this very enthusiastic entrepreneur that leads to those fortunes. And Bezos, in fact, when he made this trip, the space tourism that he did, he himself thanked the workers from Amazon, and he literally said, "You made this possible." And then the question is, then why don't you pay your workers decently, and why don't you create working conditions that also allow them to have good jobs, to have proper breaks, to have proper health insurance, and all those things? So I do think even though I see that we need to, and I agree that we need to reward people well for the efforts they make and their success, I do think we have to really reconsider the social contract and consider and shift the narrative from these fortunes are created by individuals to the narrative where this is created by collaboration between all sorts of peoples, including the background of society. All those workers were educated and trained. Well, they were raised by their parents. They were educated by their teachers. They all invested in that human capital. So I think my view is we are in this together. And then we can still find out how we do proper rewarding. But it can't be the case that right now we socialize all the costs of economic success, and then when there are profits, it goes into the hands of the shareholders. So we need to think about how we do this in an equitable way that also really gives us good societies and keeps the planet stable for future generations, because the billionaires tend to have consumption patterns that are just impossible to generalize to the whole population.
Yeah, and you keep on talking about we. I'm not sure who we are. I assume it's the government. What's the best case, Ingrid, for extreme wealth? I mean, if we had Musk or Bezos on the show, I'm not entirely sure what they would say, but my guess is they would argue that that they're driving society forward, that their kind of innovation, their drive, will ultimately, I mean, it's a kind of Reaganomics trickle down argument, that ultimately everyone will benefit from their achievements, whether it's in space or on the internet or in electric vehicles. Is that, I mean, you're obviously against extreme wealth. That goes without saying. You're the author of Libertarianism. But is that the best argument in favor of extreme wealth?
I do think that the argument for innovation, or the argument for providing good incentives, is the strongest argument against my view. But I don't think it is an argument that that makes my view, or that
No, I know, but I'm just curious what you
So
think is the best
I think
argument.
I'll try to take my opponent's position and try to see how far I can move towards them, because I do agree that we have all sorts of problems that need to be solved, and also benefits that come from innovation. I mean, I think if we were to it's more likely that we can, for example, solve climate change if we can both benefit from newer technologies and have all sorts of policy changes. So there are real, genuine benefits from incentivizing people to innovate. Now, where does innovation come from? And here it's really interesting to look at the work from Mariana Mazzucato, who is
who's been on the show, British economist.
Well, yes, then I would recommend I haven't heard that episode, but I would recommend to your listeners to listen to what she said. But basically, she thinks that innovation was once upon a time much more also fostered by governments who worked in collaboration with, say, science and industry, and so it was a shared undertaking. But this is one of the things that happened under the move from capitalism as a mixed economy, social democracy, to a more neoliberal form of capitalism, is that we've taken the government out because we no longer trust the government. Well, I can totally understand that today we do no longer trust the government, but we should, I really think, fight for a government that is working for everybody, and that includes thinking about where do we need innovation. So then, so that would be part of my answer. The other part of the answer is that if you ask me, if you want to cap wealth, where should the cap be as a societal project? And then I basically would say, okay, you have all these harms that extreme wealth concentration does, and they would give us reason to lower the cap. If it undermines political democracy there's a certain kind of kickoff point or tipping point, that's where you would want to limit wealth concentration if you're interested in protecting democracy. And you could do the same for the argument of not wasting money or solving problems or protecting the planet. All these arguments will lower the cap, will lower the amount of wealth that a person can have. And then there's this one argument that may be seen as raising the threshold, which is, well, you want to have enough space in the wealth distribution for individuals to be able to become rich, to the extent that they're motivated by money to become rich. So I think we need to balance those two. We need to reduce inequality up to a level where we're not shooting in our own foot, that we're killing innovation. And we have to broaden the ecosystem of people who conduct or who are engaged with innovation, so that we are not dependent only on those individuals that are merely or only motivated by financial gain. Because that's another thing. People are very different, and some people are really motivated by endless wealth accumulation. But you also have a lot of entrepreneurs who actually see this as a challenge, as almost like a game. They want to play a game, win it, and then they move on to the next game. So they are not actually interested in endless wealth accumulation. So the question is also, whom are we incentivizing if we have this the sky's the limit attitude that we're having right now?
We had Cass Sunstein, the co-author of Nudge, one of the leading behavioral economists, on the show a couple of weeks ago. Who is going to do all this, Ingrid? I mean, is it going to be Cass Sunstein and a group of behavioral economists? Is it going to be yourself? Is it going to be Frank Fukuyama? Who's going to determine? I want to come to the metrics of how much money we were allowed to have. I know you have some specific numbers in mind, but who's going to do all this? It's going to chill some, not limitarians, but libertarians, that somehow in all your arguments, there's this implicit idea that someone will determine how much wealth people can have. Someone is going to rewrite, recalibrate the rules about wealth accumulation.
So the answer would be, it's in the end society, it's the demos, it's the group of people who live together in a society that should decide whether they want this or not. My role as a scholar, and particularly as a philosopher, is to just answer the question that I asked myself now, I think 13 or 14 years ago. Is it a problem that some people are so rich? Is it ethically a problem? That was a question I set out. And actually at the time, most of my colleagues just thought that was an odd question. Like, what is the problem with extremely rich people? Like, they wouldn't see any problem at all. And I've, after doing the research and connecting the dots of other people's research, I've presented the case. But I see my role as presenting the case to citizens. But I do think in the end, citizens in an ideal world, in a democratic world, it's citizens who decide about the details of the social contract. They decide how they want to live together. And the problem is that right now, the extremely wealthy citizens have a much greater say in how societies are run. And there, I have a whole chapter. So basically, they undermine democracy. I have a whole chapter on how they do this.
Yeah, we've talked about that, and you're not alone in talking about that. Frank Fukuyama, one of the most influential thinkers on democracy, agrees. So are you calling for some sort of plebiscitary democracy where, for example, everyone in Holland or the United States or the United Kingdom would be asked, like in Brexit, should anyone be allowed to own more than 10 or 15 or 20 million pounds, dollars, euros? Is that what you're calling for?
I'm calling for a societal debate. I'm calling for a discussion, because I'm open to
What does that mean, a discussion? Mean coming on podcast shows?
Yes, well, I am.
Isn't that what politics is? Governments, parties run, and this stuff is determined in elections.
So we actually have elections in the Netherlands in 2 months. And there are now 2 parties that actually have limitarianism in their program, which surprised me, because I've always been thinking this is not something for the short run. And I think the parallel really
sorry to interrupt, Ingrid. Who are those parties?
The Socialist Party, not surprisingly, and a party that is a party that really focuses on the planet. It's called, I actually think their name is not well chosen, but they're called the Party for the Animals. But they consider human beings also animals. So they're ecologically focused. So they're kind of we have a Green Party that is actually, I would say, a pretty mainstream Green Party, but we have a more radical version of them, and they are the Party for the Animals. But so I myself think that this is not going to happen anytime soon, if ever at all. And that's also why I describe limitarianism as a regulative ideal. There is some Kantian flavor there, which means I think we have very good reasons to want this, but because of all the things we've been discussing, and also the fact that the world is not just and not ideal and so forth, I think it may never be possible, because people would have to be motivated by doing the good, and we have really good people who want to do good, and we have evil people, and they will try to derail us and kill their fellow citizens. So we have to deal with this mixed world, and in that world, I think we should also bring in new arguments, even if they're not immediately applicable. And what's interesting is the parallel with the rise of neoliberal thinking, because you call them libertarians. I mean, it's a term we use less in continental Europe, but libertarians are one strand within, you could say, classical liberals or neoliberals, and the rise of neoliberal thinking, which actually ultimately led to the political election of Ronald Reagan in the US and then Margaret Thatcher in the UK, didn't come from one day to the other. The ideas that were developed to then to be built upon and to strengthen and to work out into policies started in the 30s and became stronger at the end of the 40s with the founding of the Mont Pelerin Society by Hayek in 47. And I think, yes, well, that's what we'll have to accept, that some changes of overall paradigm may take a long time. And I think that is the best we can hope for. My only worry is that we can say, okay, we sacrifice one generation who will have to live in a dictatorship and whatever. But the problem is that the planet doesn't care about human beings. The planet is just a self-driving system, and we are making the planet unsafe for ourselves, but also for future human beings and other species to live on. And so that's why I think the ecological argument really for libertarianism really is the most urgent one. I hope we can solve this without immediately also have to tackle wealth inequality. But there are many scholars, scientists who work on global, so planetary governance, who also argue that this problem cannot be addressed without reducing inequality. So this is the challenge we're facing, that there's so many interlocked problems. And yeah, I am in that sense pessimistic, that I think there's really a mountain of different problems to be tackled. And the only hope I have is that more citizens will become active to really think about the question, what do we want? How do we want to live together?
Does it concern you that it seems like we have three kind of alternative systems developing? We have the American free market system, what you would call the neoliberal system. We have a Chinese state capitalism that's also producing remarkable extreme wealth and inequality. And then we have, I don't want to generalize, but a European system where the case against extreme wealth has been made in some ways with a degree of success. But while all that is going on, Europe's becoming poorer and poorer, especially compared with the United States and China. So Europe is falling behind. What do you make of that argument, and indeed the Chinese model of state capitalism, which might be the dominant model in the 21st century for countries outside Western Europe and North America?
So I am not sure whether Europe is becoming poorer.
It is in economic terms compared to the United States.
Yes, compared to the United States, yes. So that means our GDP growth is so our growth in GDP is per person is lower, and this then just really. I think the question is, what do we need to live a good life? And there's other rankings where at least Western European countries are actually higher in the rankings than the US. If you look at, if you look at life expectancy and poverty rates and so on, I'm not so sure that the richest countries are richest in terms of GDP are doing better. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't address the question how Europe should, especially now with the friction that is really rising with the US on the geopolitical front, how Europe will pay for its own welfare in the future. So I do think this is a question we should address, and but we should address it in a comprehensive way, where we also take into account all the other factors, including the decline of democracy, rising tensions between different groups, the rise of the extremist political parties, so I do think we are seeing really a crisis of these societies, and the question about the economy is only one of the questions. And what I think we need is to connect these different conversations. And I also really acknowledge that this is extremely difficult, that this is almost like it's blowing our head, like, right? We're trying to bring all these different things together, but I don't see any other possibility. I don't think we can uh, talk about the question about, say, the Draghi report and what they want the European industrial strategies to look like without talking about social cohesion or about inequality or all the other things. I think these things need to be discussed together.
Let's end. You've been very generous with your time, Ingrid. Let's end with some concrete suggestions from you on how to address this. You had an interesting piece in Wired late last year, arguing that people with extreme wealth should give it away or be penalized. You gave a fascinating interview with The Guardian last year, also suggesting that people shouldn't be allowed to have more than £10 million. And in the Netherlands, you said that should only be £1 million. What can be done? What is realistic? I mean, you mentioned Bezos's wife who gave away all her money. That just seems a repeat of Andrew Carnegie, who gave his money back to society, which doesn't involve government, which may be the only alternative in a US where the government's being undermined. What can and should be done in the short term on this?
So I think we need a strategy with multiple elements. There is no silver bullet. I do think the very wealthy have a pivotal role in this discussion, because when I make these arguments, people can say, "Oh, but she's jealous because she's not a billionaire."
Well, no one would. I mean, just judging from this conversation, it's obvious you're not.
No, you're not saying this, but people have been saying this. So I do think they have a kind of authority that non-multimillionaires might lack. And what's interesting is that in this piece in Wire, where actually I didn't choose the title, the piece is a bit different than the title. I described that there is a group of wealth holders that are getting organized because they are getting worried. So you have the UK and the US patriotic millionaires. You have the Millionaires for Humanity. In German-speaking countries, you have Tax Me Now. And they are actually basically engaged in the same kind of arguments that I'm engaged in, only then, for example, in the case of the patriotic millionaires, applied to the American context. And they also engage in lobbying for discussions, lobbying for fiscal changes that do not further reduce the fiscal contributions of the richest, because that is important to know that actually in the countries of which we have data, we are seeing regressive tax systems. So the richest actually pay a lower average tax rate than the middle classes and the poor. And in this respect, the French economist Gabriel Zucman has made a proposal.
Yeah, and Gabriel Zucman teaches over in Berkeley. Another fellow has been on the show.
Yeah, so I think the proposal he made on behalf of at the request of the Brazilian presidency of the G20, to make sure that the income taxation of all billionaires would be at least 2% of their wealth, was a very good proposal. You do need international coordination. But unfortunately, given how the division of power in the world is, that means we will have to have the US on board. If we wait long enough, perhaps it will be China. But small countries can take an initiative to get a conversation going. But I think it's only when the US will say, okay, now we really need to tax billionaires more, that something will change. So I do think the most important thing is, on the one hand, is to keep the conversation going so that we can change the narratives and demolish the myths that we have, but also to try to push for fiscal contribution and also international coordination, and at least prepare for this. But I have no illusions that any of this is going to happen overnight. I really think this is going to be a struggle for the coming decades.
Let's end on the US. You said that to do this, you need US, so to speak, buy-in. The Democratic Party is attempting to reinvent itself in the age of Donald Trump. Mamdani is running in New York. He's divided Democrats. What do you make of what's happening amongst progressives in America as you look across the Atlantic? Do you think that people like Zoran Mamdani should be the future of the Democratic Party in terms of addressing this? He has some quite radical ideas for addressing what he sees as the problem of extreme wealth in New York City.
Well, I mean, I think what we see. So I actually think, yes, the future of the Democrats. If you're inviting me, because I actually think people should decide this for themselves, but you're inviting me to comment, should be really with people who have the courage to speak up. And I think, yeah, there's some of his policies I also think might not be entirely. As an economist, for example, I think really should groceries be under the delivery of the city, but some of the other policies sound like very wise to me. We see them as radical because, as the data show us, over the last 5 decades, we have come to see them as radical, but they were not so radical. So I have statistics here in front of my nose where the highest tax rates on the richest 1% in the US in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 60s, 70s, all the way up to the 80s, were much higher than they are now. At that time, what Mamdani now proposes was just policy. So the question is, how has it come that societies have changed so much that we think these things are now radical? I know they're perceived as radical, but I think it is because societies have become much more right-wing when it comes to economic questions. So we are therefore also really in a sort of a war, I would almost say, a war of ideology, where we have to change the narrative. So I would definitely encourage leftist people and Democrats in the US to really take him seriously and really talk to him and see what he proposes.
Well, in terms of changing the narrative, Ingrid Robeyns' Limitarianism, the Case Against Extreme Wealth, it's just out in paperback, is an extremely important contribution. As you can tell from this conversation, she's not simplifying things. She understands it's a complicated, long-term problem, but she addresses it in a wonderful book from every angle. So congratulations, Ingrid, on at least bringing the problem to our attention, and a must-read for this year. If you haven't read it, please get it. It's out in paperback now. Ingrid, wonderful to have you on the show. So much more to talk about. We'll get you back on, because this is a subject that certainly is not going away. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.